All right, everyone. Good morning. Welcome to week 5. First of all, thank you all for filling in the ISCQ questionnaire last week, and thanks also for leaving feedback for us, which is really useful for us to pick up on things that need to be done. So I might just go through a few of the comments that we got. The first comment was really to ask for a weekly list of deliverables. So what I'll do is I'll start doing that with this second assignment. But I think it's also important to know that in the design studio, you guys also need to really start to manage your own time and try and get everything done in a timely manner. So essentially what happens there is that the problem with Design Studio is that the assignments are not really things that can be broken into little chunks. They're kind of, they're not linear as I described in the lecture on design last week. So really what you guys need to do is to try and get it done as fast as possible, or to get drafts done as fast as possible. And if we have drafts that we can see, then we can help you with that and a better place to advise you as to how you guys are going. So this is really no different to any design studio, and this is something that you're going to have to get used to. So I will try to help you, but on the same note, you guys need to start getting into the practice of being much more kind of self-pacing, if you like, in terms of doing your progress. But as a general thing, what you guys need to do, as I said before, is to bring us lots and lots of work. And the more work you do up front, the less work you need to do following. Okay, now the other thing is that there's a request here for specific tutorials on skills. The way that architectural education is divided is essentially that each subject area, your communications or drawing skills, your history theory, your architectural practice, your architectural technology, and then your design studio are all sort of separate things. And really, design studio is the one unit where all of those things come together. So Design Studio is really a place for you to implement the skills that you have learned in other units and in previous design studios. So it is, let me say two things. It's not really the place to be teaching you technical skills, but on the same note, we do understand that some of these things need a bit of reinforcing, if you like, or revision. So, given that, we can. There's a request here for workshop or tutorial for specific things in the lab and tutorials on Revit and CAD printing and scale and so on and so forth. So what we will do is Robert will give a workshop firstly on SketchUp, which is the easiest way to do 3D modeling for Design Studio. And then Rob will also talk a bit about how to export SketchUp then to AutoCAD or to
AutoCAD, Rhino, Revit, AutoCAD, those other different programs we use in the industry.
So that's one of those things that will really help you guys, I think, and build on the stuff that you've learned in digital environments. And I think Rob was also talking about spending a session in the workshop just to familiarize you guys with how that all works when we get to that stage. Thank you, by the way, for those of you who were complimentary and gave us nice comments. I think what that shows is that our work is appreciated, and it's always nice to hear positive things about one's teaching. as well as the things that need improvement. So thank you for that. I think one of the things which will be more clear from this lecture is really the place of the creative. So by design or on purpose, the first assignment has not really been high on the creative scale, quote unquote, if you like. So the second assignment is going to be very focused on creativity, quote unquote. So hopefully we'll deal with that way, and I'll talk a bit more about it in the lecture. And the other thing is that in terms of the measurements and what have you, I've loaded up links on Canvas to Neuford's architectural data. So have a look at that, because that's a really good publication. I would encourage you all to buy it. But if you can't come at the price, then there's a PDF, a link to a PDF on the Canvas, and have a close look at that, and that will tell you all the information that you need, general information about how big trucks are, and so on and so forth. Okay, so before we get started, just a little bit of housekeeping. Melanie fell down the stairs this morning, and she's currently in hospital getting an X-ray on her ankle. So for all of Melanie's students, can you go with Rob today, please? Rob is back, by the way. So go with Rob today, please. So meet up with him after class, and then Rob will arrange with you guys as to how to get through all of you, as well as all of his own students. So some of you may think that Rob and Melanie are actually the same person, because you don't actually ever see them together. And I'm beginning to wonder also. But it's a very good trick if indeed they are the same person. All right. So is that clear? Melanie's class, can you please meet up with Rob just over here, and then he will arrange with you as to how he's going to see you, and so on and so forth. And Rob's group, needless to say, will go back to the morning session after this. Okay, so what I want to do today really is to introduce you to the second assignment. The assignment sheets are just up there. Jack, could you grab me one? Thanks very much. Yeah. So assignment 2 is really conceptual exploration. So for those of you who haven't got one, there's an assignment sheet up there, but I'll be going through the same stuff as well. The way that we've designed this design studio is really in 3 parts, as I've mentioned before. The first one is really to get all the information that one needs about areas, about relationships between spaces, about looking at how things work and how they relate back to existing examples of petrol stations, and so on and so forth, and also looking at the site and the characteristics of the site. So that one was purposely kept quite dry, so we could focus on coming to terms with the site and the building type. And so the second assignment, which is what we're starting today, is going to be quite exploratory. Okay, it's going to be quite exploratory, and it's going to be something where you don't need to think about things like the site or things like the brief and the program or the building type. Okay, so really what I want you guys to do is to for the moment just put what you know about the site and the program from assignment 1 aside. And to focus on the actual creative or making or the process of design without program, I suppose you can say. So it's quite a sculptural sort of exercise rather than something that is related to function. So for those of you who are thinking, okay, well, we're supposed to be doing a petrol station, so how does this relate to anything? What then happens in assignment 3 is that you bring together this sculptural exercise together with the programmatic and site investigations from the first assignment, and then from there you will produce a piece of architecture. Because architecture is not just about function. Architecture It's also about talking to issues of form, light and shade, texture, and so on and so forth. So things that are not necessarily related to function. So assignment 3 is bringing everything together, and it is a big one. So really, assignment 3 for most of you will be actually bringing one of your concepts through, or both of your concepts through into, and marrying that with your analysis from assignment 1. Okay, so really, as I said last week, what we're trying to do here is take you through this step by step. In the long run, you will not necessarily be doing these 3 steps in sequence. You may chop and change, but as you are second year students, what I want you guys to be familiar with is what each stage distinctively means, so you can actually be moving forward in a very a conscious and deliberate way, if you like. Okay, so this assignment will be presented at the mid-semester review at week 9. And what we'll do is it will be a pin-up. We'll have it outside in the presentation space, and each tutorial group will present as a group. And we will get in a few externals so that we have at least one external to actually help for you guys to get a secondary idea or get someone else to cast an eye over your work and to give you some feedback. So what we will be doing is we will be recording the actual feedback given by the reviewers. And then we will upload that recording onto the Canvas as part of your feedback. All right, and if we think of anything additional in the meantime, then we will actually write it in onto Canvas. So this assignment is really about the design and production of conceptual models. So what we're looking for at the end of the day is 2 different conceptual models, which are based on needless to say, 2 different themes. So the first one is to investigate the abstract and conceptual relationships between light and heavy forms. And the second theme is to really look at the abstract and conceptual aspects of vehicular circulation. So this probably means very little to you right now, and that's fine. So what we'll do for the rest of the assignment really is to go through what these things, how this assignment will work. So these are to be made with physical models, physical handmade models. So everything has to be made by your hand, and there will be no laser cutting or computer-controlled fabrication methods. So we'll save. That's not to say that we won't have that for the entire unit. We're saving that part for the 3rd assignment. Okay. So the reason why I want everything to be handmade is because it ends up being very quick. So the idea here is really for you guys to produce a model every week. It doesn't need to be beautiful. It doesn't need to be finished or refined. It just needs to be a preliminary piece of work from which we can explore different things. Obviously, the more finished it is, the better. But really, it's about a learning process. And the only one that we want to be completely finished and beautiful is the final one. So essentially, today, what we'll do after this is we'll start working through some sketches to explore some ideas, and then next week I expect you guys to come with 2 models as a test, at least 2 models as to how you might be approaching it. We'll work on that, give you feedback, then you can go back and do it again and do it again, and then finally in week 9 to explore it, to present the final thing. So we will probably have an additional class in week 8 for those of you who are interested. If you need a bit of extra help in the week leading up to the presentation on the Tuesday, just remember that not to leave it too late, and to remember that what we're trying to do here is to work through the medium of models and lots of draft models before the final presentation. What we've learned in the past is that quite often some quite beautiful and intricate models are produced, but they're not very robust. So the things that you make need to be able to survive being transported to this class. Okay, so that's the main thing, and remember also that the whole point of this is the design, to go through the design process of iterations, which means that it is an iterative process, which basically means that you make it, we talk about it, you go back, you fix it up, or you make it again, you bring it back, we talk about it, you come back with a third iteration, and then and so on and so forth. Okay, office hours, my office hours are still the same. If you need to see me outside of class, happy to see you, happy to have a chat with you. But remember that you need to be using the tutorials as your primary point of contact. I don't want to see people, my office hours are not a replacement for people who don't want to come to the tutorials. So, what is an abstract conceptual model? What it is really to find an idea, a concept about the theme, and then to abstract it. And Rob will talk a little bit about abstraction after this, after my lecture. So I think the most important thing is that it is really a process of pulling out certain characteristics of the thing that you're looking at, rather than a simile or metaphor or symbol of that particular idea. So to go through it a little bit more, if we look at this is a design studio that I ran previously. So I asked the students to make a conceptual model and based on the traditional vernacular houses in Borneo. Okay, so what they needed to do was to abstract a certain aspect of the construction or of the architecture of vernacular houses and make a model of it. So in this exercise, what I had was really a limit on the size of the model. So in this exercise for us, the limit on the size of the model is going to be 200 by 200 by 200 millimeters. So it's going to be, so what you have is the space of a cube, and your model needs to touch all 6 sides. Okay, so in this one, it was 200 by 200 by 400. Okay, so it was a different set of parameters. So you can see with this particular model, it touches the top, and it touches all 4 sides as well as the bottom. Okay, so on that front, it conforms. But what was wrong with this model was that it was really too literal and representational, and it wasn't abstract enough. So the idea of abstraction is really not to just make what is there. The model, what we see here, is something that would be more appropriate in a history class where you're learning about the actual architecture itself. In the design class, that's not what we're looking for. We're looking for an idea in something like this to be pulled out and for that to be modeled. So right here, we have a much better example. Some of the architecture, vernacular architecture in Borneo has lashed connections, which means that the connections between the structural pieces, between all the components of the building, are actually tied together. So what this student has done is that they have actually taken just that single idea of lashing, and of course the things that it is lashing, and then made this model to represent the fact that a space and enclosure can be achieved through the lashing of bits and pieces together, and really is to bring out the idea that elements are tied together. So this one is really successful because you've got your structural elements, you've got different shapes of structural elements, big ones, small ones, and you've got very clear connections that it's all lashed together. It's touching all 6 sides of the envelope, of the 200 by 200 by 400 envelope, and it is really giving you a very clear idea. It is a clear conceptual representation of a structural system. Okay, it's not replicating the longhouse, the Borneo longhouse, where this kind of construction is used, but it is actually just showing us the spatial and I suppose tectonic, meaning the way things go together architecturally, the tectonic possibilities of this lashing system. The other thing is that it changes scale. So obviously you can think about beams and posts in the house, which are quite large things, and this is actually reducing the scale to a miniature thing, and also standardizing all the bits. So everything is made out of flat white bits of foam core, and that abstraction, I guess, that taking away of the recognizable parts actually allows one to focus on the possibilities of the lashing system. This is another example here, which was, and this student really looked at the idea of how natural materials had a specific meaning to indigenous groups in Borneo. So what they believe is that a tree has a certain spirit, and that spirit is retained in the wood after the tree has been cut down. And what they try and do is they actually try to maintain the top and the bottom of the tree in the same alignment throughout. So what's happening in this one is that this student is basically using the idea of that indigenous conception of the tree spirit and the tree in the architecture. So essentially what they're exploring here is the possibility that an architecture can be created completely out of a naturally occurring situation. Okay, so again, it's really investigating that dual meaning of timber as tree and timber as structure, and trying to get that idea across. This one was in the same design studio where I asked them to look at the idea of Borneo fauna as a way of generating ideas about space, about texture, about structure, about enclosure, and so on and so forth. So if we look at the silvery lutung monkey and the shimmering coat, what this student then went to do is to try and try and investigate that idea of the shimmer. Okay, that idea of the shimmer without, of course, going to catch a silvery monkey and killing it and making its pelt into a model. So what this is a very super scale idea of monkey fur, and trying to get across an idea as to how this silvery effect is. So really it's trying to make that lighting effect, that shimmering effect, without actually using the monkey itself. All right, so you can see here that the concept is actually the shimmering nature of the material, and the method is to try and replicate that in a way that has nothing to do with fur. And you can see by the use of this matte silver painted paper or card that you can see that there's many different tones there depending on the reflectivity of each of those, which gives you a better sense of it. You can also see that the whole thing is stuck down to these wires, and it's really something that's hard to represent here, because what happens is when every time you touch the model, it kind of moved a little bit in a certain way, and that sort of shimmering idea really came out through in terms of a texture. Okay. By the way, these two examples here were for a tropical high-rise building. Okay, so really, it's the idea here is to use something that's not related to the final type to bring out possibilities for light and shade, for enclosure, for texture, for structure, for form. And for relationships between each and all of those things. This was another design studio which was actually about a tropical museum based in Mooloolaba. We ran this design studio really more as a like one would do an architectural competition. So the students weren't required to go to Queensland, and quite often you just have to make do with the material that you have in your remote area. It's quite a common way for architects to actually design things. Canberra is a very good example. The city of Canberra was designed through an architectural competition. Once they got all their registrations, they knew where most of the architects who entered the competition were from. So the competition, the people who ran the competition, the Australian government, then had a model of the site made in brass, which was then shipped around the world to each of the cities where those architects were to actually show them what the site was like. Yeah, so most of the architects nearly all of the architects who put in entries for the design of Canberra did not actually come to Canberra to look at it. Certainly Walter Burley Griffin, who won the competition, did not come to Australia until after he had won the competition and had been awarded the actual commission to design the city. So this was how we did this one. Now, one of the themes was the Queensland House. Now you can imagine that a museum is a very different program to a house, and so its architecture. So what I wanted to do was I wanted the students to be aware of how traditionally Queensland architecture dealt with issues of light and shade, of climate, and so on and so forth. So this student here actually did a really beautiful model, which you see on the on the left, which was actually pulling out the idea of the screen as it's used in the Queensland House, which is really something that allows airflow but gives you a bit of security and privacy, and really explored the effects, the shadow, shelter, and enclosure effect of making something completely out of a screen. And this one also, I think, was quite successful on that front, because you actually learned something about the Queenslander house, about the base concept, without it actually being a Queenslander house. So we did this also last year, and we had some quite difficult concepts, but we also had some really good results. So this one was based on the wattle flower, and to look at the wattle flower, which really looks quite chaotic. If you look at this, it has a general form, but where it comes out of, how far it gets, there's gaps, there's long ones, there's short ones, and so on and so forth. So this student was really looking at how to use that idea of chaos to fit it into the required boundary. So last year we used something that was 200 by 200 by 400, or was it 100 by 100 by 300? I can't remember. But then you see the resultant thing actually starts off from this point where you've got a node in the middle and things coming out of it. But in fact, the resultant thing is nothing like this. but gives a really good idea as to the possibilities of this kind of structure and where it could be taken to become something that tells us something about enclosure, texture, and so on and so forth. This one was actually about a non-urban rural settlement. So you can see that this student was actually looking at things in the landscape and working through sketches as well as through models. And the idea here was that really they chose to represent this concept by contrasting it against the city, which is something that is quite ordered and quite dense. And with rural settlement, it's really something that is much looser and actually comes through a different structure. So really, the model explores the order of the city and the different kind of order in rural areas here, and really comes up with quite a beautiful model over here. With both of these models, you can see that they were made not only with cardboard, but use all sorts of different materials to achieve the ends: wire, string, bits of wood, bits of metal, and so on and so forth. So it's completely open to you guys for this assignment. You do not need to. You're not limited with any kind of material. The only limitation is that you have to make it with your hands rather than have it made on a machine. Another example here, you can see this is a certain type of flower on the top there, and what this student was doing was noticing that the flower appeared to be made out of facets. So they then went and tried to replicate the idea of the facets, which is something that they had observed rather than something that they had read, because the flower actually isn't made out of facets, but what the flower does have is the kind of light effects that you have in this particular flower means that you get that kind of shimmering effect again when it moves. So what they were trying to do was to replicate that shimmering nature with something that was fixed, and the way you notice it shimmered was actually for the observer to actually move around the object itself. Are there any questions? All right, so what we'll do now is I'll hand over to Rob, and then Rob will just talk a bit more about abstraction and creativity.
All right. Yeah, so as John said, I'll be discussing a little bit about abstraction, concepts, and creativity. So in your education throughout architecture, it's probably the most elusive things to sort of get a grip on what abstraction kind of is. And the place that I'll start at is etymology of abstract and abstraction. Does anyone know what etymology means? So for those who don't, etymology means the understanding of language and what it means, where it comes from, and why that is. So looking at the basis of what abstraction is and where it comes from, it's an ancient Latin word, I believe, and it kind of means to remove something. So the best way I can describe that is to like wipe your clothes. So if you can imagine your clothes having sort of dust and hair and whatnot on it, and if you were to wipe it, some of it would be removed and some would remain. Okay, so the Latin term abstractus means to wipe. To drag away from or to remove things from things. Okay, that will reveal to you concepts. Okay, and concepts are a mental understanding that describes the nature of things to you. So if we do a little bit of tutorial on that, if we look at the idea of a table, for example, it's a physical object, but we can abstract concepts out of it. So if we look at a table and we remove things from it, our understanding of the table will change until we can remove it so far that we find what it is, what a table actually is, and we can understand it. So looking at this table here, for example, or any table that we construct in our mind, is that we can look at its material. Okay, so tables can be made from metal, they can be made of plastic, they can be made of wood. It doesn't really matter what material it is, it still maintains to us what a table is, correct? Now we can look at other things. We can, for example, we can change its height or its size. So if we, draw its width or we draw its depth, does it still maintain that idea of table to us? We could look at its function as well, being able to place things on it. But when we start manipulating things like that, our understanding of what table is changes dramatically. So using that idea of raising a table or lowering a table, if we were to take the table and remove it down to the ground completely, it becomes flawed to us as a mental construct. Okay, so that's what a concept is revealed to us, is that it's a mental describer to understand the nature of a thing. So the idea of table, you could say in this example, is a elevated platform. Okay, it's not about its material. It's not even about its structure. So we can say that a table may have 4 legs, it can have 2 legs, it can have 1 leg, it can just be a solid mass. It doesn't change the fact that we can still use it at a certain height and place things upon it. So when we abstract things, we take away things to reveal an essence to us. And that essence becomes our concept. Okay, so we go through this process of reduction and removing to find what remains. So that's what that Latin phrase abstractus kind of comes from. So when you wipe away and you wipe as hard as you can, what remains is essentially the essence of the thing that you're looking for. So that's a good way to sort of understand what abstraction is and how to find concepts. Now, when it comes to things like creativity, all these terms are actually quite rational and quite logical things to do. Okay, so creativity is not just sort of random creation or random form making or random whatever for the sake of creativity. Creativity can be described as problem solving. Okay, so every single architectural project has problems that you are dealt, and your response to those through abstraction and concepts and understanding of metric things like we went through in the analysis all come together. So creativity is a way to solve the problem that you've been sort of presented. So we abstract from concepts, we derive our concepts, and we use those concepts to come up with a strategy to organize our architecture to produce a piece of work. And looking at how we do this abstraction in terms of the assignment or in terms of architecture, again, understanding the etymology of architecture will become quite critical. So architecture is an ancient Greek word. It's a composite word from 2 Greek words, ancient Greek words, archi and tekton. So as John mentioned earlier in the example of the Borneo house lashing, he mentioned that it was the tectonic of the house. Okay, so tectonic means in in ancient Greek rather, the construction of something or the putting of things together to form something, okay? It's craft making, crafting something. And archi means the authority or the law of something, okay? So an example would be, say, an archangel. All right, an archangel, if we're familiar with that, is essentially the lawmaker of sort of the angels that are underneath it. And the tecton is to put those things together in a physical form. So architecture is the authority of putting things together. And the authority or that law comes from our concepts, it comes from our understanding, it comes from our abstraction, and it comes from our strategies. Okay, so that's why it's really important to put these things together. So we have the rational, logical things of our understanding from the analysis that we're doing. Now we have the archi, the law making of the things that we get with our abstraction and concepts and strategies, and we put those things together. Okay, so that's what architecture is putting all these things together, and that's what makes essentially architecture. Okay, so as John said at the start of this, architecture is not just this dry metric thing where we just look at square meterage and functional things. It's also a little bit extra. Okay, there's an excess that comes with that. So in an analogy to being an architect, you could look at, say, a chef. Now, as a pure metric thing, as a pure dry thing, the food that you like and the food that you need are 2 different things. So you can imagine your diet of brown rice and broccoli not being a particularly enjoyable way of sort of maintaining sustenance. That's not what you want your everyday life. And I've been through that. I've been an undergrad. I've been broke before. But we want to enjoy our experiences. We want to enjoy and we want to have a bit of celebration with that. Okay, so that's where this idea of abstraction, concepts, and strategy comes from. Okay, it's like the difference of having steamed brown rice and broccoli and a 4-course meal. All right, so that's where the value of architecture comes into it. It's not just this bland, dry, basic thing where we have square meterage and all these analytical things, but it's where we put these 2 things together. Okay, that was a bit quick and a bit pretty solid. Is there any questions or any concerns or misunderstandings? Nope.
Okay, so in light of that, let's just go back to the 2 things that we have. So really, the concepts that we will be exploring. The first one is light and heavy forms. These are very, very general things that are quite often explored in architecture. And the second one being vehicular circulation. So what you need to do is you need to think about the relationship between light and heavy forms. So first of all, you've got to think about what is a light form, what is a heavy form, and how do you make those things, and then how do you then represent the relationship between the two things in a way that gives us a really clear idea as to that relationship. Okay, so it's not so really we have to find the essence of those things that Robert said in order to bring that to the models. Now this is not something that one will necessarily get at the first go. This is something that is quite experimental. You need to play with it and test things to see how they actually work, and to assess them by the thing that you make. So you get it out of your head, through your fingertips, onto a physical thing that you can put on the table. And then the same with vehicular circulation. So what is the essence of vehicular circulation? And there's millions and millions of possibilities with most of these things, right? So all of you are going to come up with different things, because the idea that you know, and that we want everybody's models to be unique from other people's models, and I think that's pretty easy to do, because I've never had two people come with the same model, and that's the other thing with actually doing these things iteratively, is that we can all see what everyone else is doing, so that we can learn from what they are doing, but also so that we can not do what they are doing. Yeah, to come up with our own unique approach to abstraction. So certainly with vehicular circulation, I don't want you just to give me a slab of bitumen, for example, you know, which is very literal. You've got to think about movement, you've got to think about direction, you've got to think about materials, you've got to think about sound, heat, light, cold, etc., etc., etc. So really, it's looking at the essence, not an essence of what vehicular circulation might be, rather than to build me a scale model of a freeway. Okay, are there any questions? Okay, so just to reiterate, in terms of how the tutorials are going to work today, for Jack and myself, we will have tutorials as normal. Unfortunately, Melanie had a fall this morning, and she's in hospital getting an X-ray. She believes she will be fine for next week. She tells me she'll be fine for next week. But for today, what we will do is, Melanie students, please go and see Rob after this lecture. And Rob's students, Rob is back. So Rob's tutorials will go back to the morning. And Melanie students, please go and see Rob, and he'll arrange with you as to how he's going to see you for this week. And then next week we'll go back to Melanie at the regular time. Thanks, everyone. Thank you.